And welcome on in to the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe Podcast. He is George Bremer. I am Ryan Hickey. And we are here on this Thursday, George, to preview NFL free agency. In case you missed it, make sure you go back and check us out on YouTube, Blue Horseshoe Pod, wherever you do get your podcasts, or Blue Horseshoe Pod on YouTube. We broke down everything from the scouting combine on Tuesday, basically gave you one full recap, everything you need to know, how it impacts the Colts, which quarterbacks, how the quarterback stocks, I should say, impact them going forward, what the price of the number one pick could be with the Bears. A lot of good stuff, I thought, coming out of combine week there in Indy. And now we quickly turn our attention to free agents and how the Colts can start to build their team in the eye of Shane Steichen for 2023. So let's get into this, George. We have a lot of different areas to talk about here. Even though Chris Ballard is someone who historically has not gotten or not been very active in free agency, we will discuss positions of need. We will discuss the one free agent the Colts have to re-sign, that's theirs. The one free agent that's not on their team, the Colts should sign this free agency period. So we got a lot of good stuff for you. Let's start with this, George. Colts right now, currently as it stands, according to SpotRack, have $12.7 million available of cap space, which is 15th most, so just above or basically league average there heading into free agency. We just mentioned before, historically, Chris Ballard has not been very active in free agency and has not built the team a lot through offseason signings. How active do you expect Chris Ballard to be this offseason?
Not very. I mean, the money's not there, and so I think that's going to require a lot of it. They can move some things around. They can get some more money. They probably will here early in the week next week. I expect Matt Ryan to be released. I expect Nick Foles to be released. There'll be a little bit more money there. There's some other things they can do. They can restructure if they need to. They haven't really done a lot of that in the past, but those are all available. They've got some guys on longer term deals that they could do that with. But I think ultimately it's just not in his DNA. I mean, that's not his thing. Now, I do think they'll be more active than they have been in years past. But a lot of that, I think, is just the new coaching staff. I mean, every time you look across the league, when you get a new head coach, he wants to bring in his guys. So you'll see people who have either directly worked with Shane Steichen before or are in systems that are similar to what he's run. And I think you probably see a little bit of that with Gus, too, because they really didn't do a ton of it last year. And so you probably, although he got a couple guys, but I would imagine the same will happen again when we have a couple guys that are in that sort of Seattle style of defense that they'll want to bring in. But I don't think there'll be that big money, splash headline. It's just not something they tend to do, and it doesn't feel like the right year to do it.
I think they'll actually be more active in free agency than years past. Here's why. When we talk about the number one overall pick, we talk about this draft for the Colts. It's presumed we expect the Colts to try to make a push to trade up to number one. If you're going to do that, if you're Chris Ballard, you're going to pay, we believe, at least on the surface right now, as you sit here on March 9th, a pretty heavy price, whether that's 2 first-round picks, maybe it's 3 first-round picks, maybe it's just a bunch of later-round picks, second, third, fourth, the next 2 or 3 years. Either way, however you want to shake it out, you are going to be missing some legitimate draft capital from this year's draft and probably next year's draft that Chris Ballard, for the most part, loves to use. And again, we've seen him really, in a perfect world, build most of the team through the draft. If you anticipate losing some of those key assets that you have that you would normally use to build a team, I think Chris Ballard this offseason, because I think we'll see him uncharacteristically trade up, lose those assets. I think he'll then uncharacteristically be more aggressive in free agency and just maybe pursue a few other guys. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's not a big time free agent guy that's going to be a blockbuster, or I'm not saying he's going to do what the Patriots did a few years ago and give the most guaranteed money we've ever seen a team do in one free agent period. But I think he will strike a balance in the middle because, again, we've seen him be not very active whatsoever in free agency in years past. I just think this is a year where if you anticipate and you expect to trade up and give away assets, I think that means you're going to have to find players somehow and build a solid roster around that young quarterback somehow. I think you supplement that with being more active than you normally are in free agency. And you mentioned it. Right now, they're 15th in cap space. Not a ton of wiggle room right now to make some moves. But like you said, Nick Foles coming off the books. We expect Matt Ryan coming off the books. There'll be some dead cap money there, but still some flexibility as well. And I do think that's going to allow for, maybe more names. Let's say maybe not one big splash signing, but the number of players signed in free agency, I think, could be more for, some smaller money deals. But I think we will see the Colts unlike the past 6 years under Chris Ballard's regime, I think we'll see him be more active in free agency just because, again, I think that for the first time they are kind of budgeting. We're going to lose some draft picks in this year's draft and next year's draft. And usually we've built a team, the last few years through the draft. And now we're not going to be able to do that because we're going to be losing some key assets.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I think that'll be one of the key indicators here on the fairly early end of, how interested they are in trading up. If you see them sign a bunch of guys and it is a free agency period that feels abnormal in that regard, that's going to be a real hint that they're trying to move up in the draft, because that is a huge factor here. You pay what you have to get a quarterback. Firmly believe in that. I think the last 5 years here should prove that. I mean, going on that quarterback carousel, you do what you have to do to get off of that. But part of that's going to be, as you said, losing picks that they really find to be very valuable to them. So we'll see how that plays out. I think the one thing that can keep them from getting heavily involved in this free agency, or, in the draft, as far as that goes, moving up, is if the guy that they have targeted is maybe not among the most coveted. Like if they come out and they say either CJ Stroud or Will Levis is the top guy on their board, I'm not saying they will, but if they come out and they say one of those two guys is legitimately their guy, then you may sit there and say, you can stay at 4 and get your guy legitimately. That's the only, and that's why I think it's more likely that's not the case. So it's more likely they're trading up. And if they are, then yeah, you're going to give up a lot of capital to do that. And you've got to find a way to get those players in here somehow. I still think it's not going to be, like you said, not the Patriots. It's not going to be some massive amount of money. But I think they will go and try to find guys with the traits similar to what they do in the later rounds of the draft. When you see day 3, free agents in that vein, guys that have some trait that stands out that they want either on offense or defense.
You're right about that. If they identify Will Levis when it comes down to it as their QB1 in this draft, you're right. You could sit at 4. You don't have to even sweat, I think, about him being taken in the first 3 picks, no matter who trades up, no matter what kind of craziness we see. I think there's definitely, if you're Chris Ballard, you feel very safe sitting there at 4 and Will Levis still being on the board. That's for sure. But I think you're also right, too. Like, I think the Colts fans, right? So Monday is the legal tampering period where teams are able legally to talk to any and every free agent on the market. They can officially start to be signed on Wednesday, the 15th. So if we're sitting here Wednesday, the first day you could start signing free agents, and you have the Colts signing again, maybe not a big name, but a flurry of 3, 4, 5 guys, I think that is an indication and something to tell you that, okay, there's foreshadowing of Chris Ballard anticipates trading up. He anticipates giving draft capital away, and that's why now he's supplementing that by being more active in free agency than he has been before, because he's always, for the most part, had a bevy of picks. The Colts have 7 picks in the draft upcoming, but if you lose 2, 3 of them, again, we've seen Chris Ballard do a really good job later rounds, especially of finding guys, finding starters, finding contributors. If you take one of the 2 of those picks away, you're still going to get that contributor somehow. Again, especially when you have a young quarterback, you still want to put a good team around him. And that's why I think this could lead to being a more active free agent period for Chris Ballard and the Colts than we've been accustomed to seeing, let's say, the past 6 years or so. How about this, George? Let's talk about positions of need. Because whether it's free agency, whether it's the draft, we just watch a team go 4-12-1 and completely fall apart during the stretch. They are nowhere outside of quarterback, nowhere near perfect, need help in a lot of areas. If we talk about positions of need, what would you say right now for the Colts is their biggest area where they need to address? Again, it could be free agency, it could be the draft. Outside of quarterback, what's that number 1 position you're looking for?
I think it's corner, honestly, just because as you look at that depth chart right now, Stephon Gilmore's got 1 year left here in all likelihood. It's hard to really imagine him coming back after that deal. He's getting up there in age. And unless they really take off next year and he feels like they're a Super Bowl contender, you figure he's going to want to go somewhere else, try to chase that ring, another ring for him. And then behind him, do you re-sign Brandon Faison? And even if you do, does that change your thinking on the needs there? Kenny Moore, is probably not long for Indy one way or another, whether it's this year or the year after. It feels like a divorce is coming there. And even Isaiah Rodgers, there's just some oddity there with the scheme fit. He played well again, but obviously it took him a long time to get on the field. It certainly indications there that this defensive staff isn't completely sold on him. And so, you know, that's your top 4 guys, and you can't guarantee any of them will be here in 2024. So to me, that's right there after quarterback. I mean, you got to go get that. In my mind, feels like a sign one, pick one. You know, get a free agent and draft a guy, because that closet could be barren really quickly.
And you look at even secondary as an overall, right? If you just even expand it to safety as well, assuming Rodney McLeod is not back, you have a lot of inexperience there as well. Well, Rodney Thomas played well, but was just a rookie. Julian Blackman is solid, you know, he's coming along, but again, is still, you know, a player early in his career. Nick Cross couldn't get in the field. He's 20 years, he can't even drink legally still. So this is the guy we look like, even like if you expand to the safeties as well, there's not a lot of experience, not a lot of guys that, you know, have that gravitas where you look at the back end and now you see teams throwing the ball more and more. You said you're 100% right. There's a lot of question marks, a lot of holes, and a lot of guys that, you know, don't really seem to fit what Gus Bradley wants to do secondary wise that you're going to have to adjust and get help with. I like the corner pick. I'll go offensive line because if you really look at it, Quentin Nelson, I know he had a really down year. I feel like if you're the Colts, you still feel really good about him going forward here. I think he can shake off one bad year. I think you still feel really good about Braden Smith. Otherwise, there's really not a third guy you feel great about. Bernard Ryman showed some really good strides down the stretch, but this is a third-round rookie at left tackle, the most important position. And again, assuming you draft a young quarterback, you're still going to have a project at left tackle blocking the blind side of a rookie quarterback. Not exactly something you can feel great about. Will Fries did a really good job at filling in at right guard and kind of cemented his role last year. But again, do you feel great about Will Fries going into 2023? I don't. So when you look at offensive line, and this is something we'll get to in a little bit here with free agents, but I really think that this is an opportunity for Chris Ballard to make a real splash and actually get a real answer at offensive line, because obviously there's a good amount of offensive linemen, especially tackles, that are going to be available for the Colts to sign. Obviously that brings veteran experience, which is something that this, you know, offensive line could use. And again, if you even look at Ryan Kelly as well, down year, he's not performed to his contract. And there's a lot of questions of, could he be traded this offseason? Could he be included in a possible trade up with the Bears as well? So like, you almost kind of feel like going into next year, there's 2 starters that are solidified. Quentin Nelson at left guard and Brady Smith at right tackle. And the other 3 are interchangeable. And so compared to last offseason, at least you felt good about Ryan Kelly going to 2022. And obviously that did not work out. But you had left tackle as a question and right guard. You can make the argument there are more questions going into this year's going into the 2023 season, I should say, at offensive line than there were last year. And that to me is concerning. So again, especially when you're talking about putting a rookie quarterback behind that offensive line, you have to find some definitive answers. Chris Ballard, the last few years, has tried with later round draft picks, has tried getting cute and getting, you know, through with swing tackles in Matt Pryor and trying to just, you know, basically put a band-aid on a bullet hole. And we've seen that absolutely not work out. This has to be the offseason. I think Chris Ballard makes a real push at acquiring an anchor, whether that's left tackle, whether it's right guard, whether it's center. Get another anchor, so at least you feel great about 3 guys on the offensive line, and maybe slide someone around or 2 and move some things around where you can feel good about 4 or 5. But you have to feel a lot better about your starting 5 going into 2023 than you did in 2022. And right now, that has to mean, at least for me, especially with free agency coming up next week, that has to mean free agency, getting someone with veteran experience, getting someone who's proven it already to kind of come in there and actually be a real answer, not a hope project or not just a Band-Aid like we've seen now for the last few years.
Yeah, and he kind of mentioned that, you know, in the combine, it went a little bit under the radar just because everything was all quarterback all the time, as it has been here for a couple of months. But he said, you know, offensive line will be better next year, and they've got to increase competition there. So, you know, what does that look like? A lot of that depends. It goes back to some of what we were just talking about. If you have more picks, if you have a 2nd-round pick, for instance, well, you might be able to get an interior lineman there that could really help this football team. If you don't, you better be looking out there in free agency. And I think that's, as you said, even if you do have all your picks, I think bringing in some veterans and making some more certainty there is a really good idea. Part of the problem last year was you had a left tackle in Matt Pryor who'd never started at the position before, and a right guard in Danny Pinner who had never started the position before. And it took forever to kind of figure out around them how that was going to work. I don't think you want to go back through that again. Now, obviously, you could go back with the line you had, and they're going to have more experience than they did a year ago, because Bernard Raymond and Will Fries right now, as it stands, are more experienced at those spots than Pryor and
Pinter, right?
Pinner were coming in last year. But it's he says he's not going to stay in pat, and I really don't think he can. So that'll be huge. I think that's right there. Left tackle is a really interesting spot because as much as the quarterback carousel has been talked about, left tackle has been sort of a turnstile the same way. You just, since Anthony Costanzo retired, you just keep trying to plug people in there. You haven't been able to find that answer. And, it's probably equally important. You wonder, is Raymond the guy? But like you said, he's a 3rd-round rookie. There's hope, there's promise, but you probably want to get some insurance there. Just feel a little better about that spot.
Right. And again, make the young rookie quarterback's adjustment to the NFL easier and better. And one of the ways you do that is not getting them hit. It sounds overly simplified, but that's just the reality, George. Like I said, I mean, look, we looked at Matt Ryan and why he failed and why he had so many turnovers and couldn't onto the football. The reality was someone was on Matt Ryan for sure. Someone was on the fact that anytime he dropped back, there was some guy screaming in his face and he couldn't get away from him. So it's like that is, they worked hand in hand. The offense line and the quarterback are almost. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Wow. Just talking about is how bad the 2022 season was. Just trying to sneeze and just trying to purge it from my system. But that's like, especially the first 9 weeks of the year or 7 weeks of the year, Matt Ryan was a starter. It's just like you watch those games and it's like he had no prayer at times. And that's part of the reason why when we talked about the benching of Matt Ryan in the first place, it's like, is he really the biggest problem with this team? And the biggest reason why that question was there is because the offense line was so bad. They couldn't establish the run game. That's another thing too. Forget just the pass protection or lack thereof. The run game and Jonathan Taylor had few holes to go through as well. So again, you want to complement the run game with a young rookie quarterback. You want to protect him, keep him upright. The best way to do that is to get the best 5 guys you can blocking in front, opening those holes. And like I said, right now, from what we've seen last year, you absolutely cannot run back. Even the line that finished the year, they got better and showed some improvements the last month of the season. You cannot, they've lost the benefit of the doubt. You can't do that anymore. So, like I said, you got to go for an upgrade. And again, especially then that's a position that Chris Ballard has neglected the last few years, even though he's talked about his entire tenure building the Colts from the inside out and building them through the trenches. Now you got to start making good again on your word, and that starts really in free agency as well. With getting some offensive linemen that can protect your young rookie quarterback. We'll give you some names of who to watch for and a splash move that the Colts absolutely should do here in a little bit. Let's just talk about other needs as well, George. Again, it could be in free agency, it could be in the draft as well. But another position I look at, well, I do think now you are starting to see it become more of a necessity than a luxury, is wide receiver. You have Michael Pittman Jr., obviously. You have Alec Pierce as well. Behind that, it's a lot of questions, not a lot of experience, not a ton of production. Paris Campbell is obviously the biggest name we'll talk about right here, since he is a free agent and is coming off the best year of his career, actually stayed healthy, but was very productive. Is that a guy where should the Colts just re-sign in your mind Paris Campbell and have it kind of just be, okay, we're good here? Is that a position where you got to add 2 other guys, whether it's in free agency in the draft? Is this where you kind of, okay, thanks Paris for having a career year, we still can't trust we're going to move on? Like, how would you approach the position of receiver if you're Chris Ballard?
I think you got to add there no matter what. I would definitely try to bring Paris Campbell back because I don't know. To me, the slot receiver spot is in particular where you have a need. And yes, I don't know there's anybody else on the roster that fits that role right now. I mean, you could talk about Ashton Doolin and trying to move him there, but there's nobody else that's really a natural slot guy that they currently have. So if you lose Paris Campbell in free agency, which is a real possibility, then that becomes an immediate need. Can you draft that guy? Again, it depends on what picks you have. I mean, that second round pick would be almost perfect to bring in the slot receiver. But if you don't own it, if Chicago has it, you're going to find another way to go get that guy. And so either that means re-signing Paris Campbell or paying for somebody on the outside. And if we go back through what Chris Ballard has done through most of his career, the way that he operates, he always prefers to sign his own guys. So to me, the easy answer is to bring Paris Campbell back and then find some more help in free agency at a lower cost. You bring in a slot receiver, they know it first is going to cost you a lot. The price of that across the league has gone up already quite a bit. But they also know you're desperate. And so they're going to milk you a little bit. If you're able to bring back Paris Campbell, you can bring somebody in who's a little more versatile, who's not specifically a slot receiver, who would be able maybe to back up all 3 positions, like T.Y. Hilton did when he was here. Somebody like that could move across the line, be where they need to be. But I think that's a critical spot because, again, at the end of the day, you're expecting to have a rookie quarterback in here. You want to do everything you can to protect him. Well, what are the three things right away that help him the most? Get that offensive line shored up so he's not under fire the entire time. Get the run game restarted so that he's got his best friend there, and give him more weapons on the outside. I think the tight ends are intriguing. I think that'll be something the quarterback will like, having Jelani Woods, getting Ogletree back. I think that's an interesting group there. You could add there as well. But the receiver group, like you said, after Pittman and Pierce, where there's still a lot of projection there too. I mean, Pittman's still the only guy with like real production, and it's really only 1 year that you really felt good about that. There's just too many question marks, and I think letting Paris Campbell go adds to that. I say that believing it's a real possibility. I definitely think he could end up in Carolina, as much as the relationship with him and Frank Reich, as strong as that is. I definitely think he could end up in Carolina, but I think you've got to do everything in your power to bring him back and add at that position.
I think you mentioned before, this has to be one of those sign one, draft one sort of positions where you sign someone in free agency now, get that veteran experience there, but also like I said, build depth and get someone 5th round, 6th round. We have seen now, especially with the way the offense is kind of run in college, you can get really good receivers later on in the draft. You don't have to have a 1st round pick. You don't have to even have a high 2nd round pick to get a great wide receiver in the draft. The depth is really there, especially the last few years. So you can do, if you're Chris Ballard, wait till the 4th round, 3rd round, to really kind of draft your guy. So I think this has to be a position where if you're the Colts and looking at roster construction, sign one in free agency, draft one as well. When it comes to signing one in free agency, I'm with it. It has to be Paris Campbell. Has to be Paris Campbell because, one, he does something right now Pierce and Pittman can't do, take the top off the defense. Right? He is the burner. He is the guy that can make the huge explosive plays. He's the guy you could dump it off underneath and have him run 30 yards. He's the guy who always has the defense pausing in terms of, we have to have someone back because he can absolutely beat us over the top. You need that speed element in an offense to, even if he's not catching 60-yard deep balls, just be the threat of that possibility happening. Helps open up the field for a young quarterback. But also, too, like I said, the slot market, especially in free agency, is not really that enticing, not really that good, and really not cost efficient. Like you look at Alan Lazard is someone you could probably bump down, from the Green Bay Packers. Maybe you could bump him into the slot. But that's a guy who's going to be, one of the more higher profiled receivers on the market. He's going to be probably too expensive for the Colts. Spot Rack had him at about a $12.5 million average annual salary per year, which, again, when you're talking about the Colts having $12.7 million, I know you can move things around, but that's basically the entire cap room they have right now on one guy. DJ Chark is another kind of explosive guy. We saw him in Jacksonville a little bit, but he's hurt as well. He's banged up. He's never been able to be on the field for, a full season. So again, why sign someone like that for a little bit higher value who you can't trust to get on the field? That's one of the perils of free agency. Why Chris Ballard has kind of shied away from building a lot of his team through there is because you want to get guys that are healthy. And obviously the more wear and tear you have on your body, the harder that is to do. But I'm with the Paris Campbell, and that's the guy to re-sign. He obviously knows the team, been in the building. He provides a new element that Pittman and Pierce cannot provide, and does, again, solid when he's on the field. He's had solid production all throughout his entire career. The only issue, obviously, is the inability to stay on the field. But I'm with him. You look at receiver, that has to be one of the highest priorities for the Colts. I think re-sign Paris Campbell, keep Frank Reich and Carolina Panthers away, and keep one of your own guys there, especially because, like I said, it's kind of frightening looking out at the wide receiver free agent market. Not a lot of enticing, cost-efficient options out there.
No, and every year, I mean, that market has just exploded. So I think that's one of the things
Also true.
You want to keep your own, because you're going to pay big money to bring in a guy, and then you got to find out if he's actually going to work in your system. I would much rather keep the guy that you've got. You know what his role is. If you're going to pay either way, pay for the guy the guy that you drafted, the guy that you brought in here for a reason. To me, that just makes a lot more sense. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because again, there's so many questions on this offense. You're talking about the league's worst offense last year in many categories. And so you've got to find a way. A quarterback alone is not going to fix that. It's a big piece of the puzzle, obviously, but you can't put all that on a 22, 23-year-old kid or 20-year-old kid in Richardson's case. That's just asking too much. Bring him in here and say, be our savior. That feels like a recipe for failure. You've got to really shore some things up. And to me, receivers right there, right along with the offensive line. I mean, those are the things that are going to help this rookie feel better. You see it, around the rest of the league. I mean, Joe Burrow's an incredible talent, but how much of another level did he go to after they brought Jamar Chase into him? I mean, that's the
Stephon
formula.
Diggs and the Bills with Josh Allen. I know those are elite
Mhm.
receivers we're talking about, but like you said, the we have seen in the last few years, you have really good receivers. You're going to get, your quarterback play, that they're going to take their game to the next level. So it just
And
makes the
Shane
quarterback's
Steichen
life
just saw
easier.
it. Shane Steichen
Yeah,
just saw it with AJ Brown and
great
Jalen
call.
Hurts. So, I think he's very aware of this dynamic.
Absolutely. It's a great call. And again, Paris Campbell is not someone like AJ Brown or Stephon Diggs. Don't get us wrong. Or even Michael Pittman Jr. is not at that caliber either. It's obviously a process. You got to get there. But again, it also doesn't hurt to have a group of 3 or 4 solid receivers you can lean on, feel good about, because while you may not have that alpha dog, at least if you have 3 or 4 guys that defense has to worry about at all times, again, it just helps open up the field, makes the reads easier for the quarterback, and makes their life easier, which when their life is easier, George, we have seen they're actually able to have success and able to play well. What a concept, that is for sure. All right, 2 other positions of need here. How about defensive line? And specifically defensive end, right? That's been a situation, or that's been a position where the Colts have tried a ton to put resources into it, have not over the last few years, have not really kind of got consistent production. It looks like Yannick Ngakoue may be gone. So you're going to have Dio Dengbo and Kwity Paye as the 2 edge rushers going into the 2023 season. Not much outside of them, like not much behind them, not much experience between the 2 of them. It's a position where, again, if you can really get some veteran presence there, I think that would go a very long way for the Colts because they need some help, defensive end especially.
Yeah, I mean, they drafted Paye and Adangbo with the idea that they would eventually take over those roles, and I think there's probably going to be a thought in the building that time might be now, especially the way Adangbo finished the year. There are definitely some questions about which of them, fits at that Leo spot, because neither one of them on paper is prototypical, that smaller speed rush guy. But Odangbo played there and played well, so that probably gives them some comfort there. That's a spot where I kind of expect to see something along the lines of Isaac Rochelle a couple of years ago, a veteran with some upside, a younger veteran who maybe hasn't had a ton of playing time, looking for an increased role, who they could bring in and let them compete. Because you figure your top 3 there, I'm assuming Tyquan Lewis is going to be back. He seems like a guy who wants to come back. The team likes him a lot. I don't think he's going to be expensive, unfortunately, coming off another knee injury. But so there's your top 3 edge guys, you would imagine, Paye, Odangbo, and Lewis. You want to bring in another veteran, not a guy in his 30s, somebody in that 26, 27-year-old range who maybe 3-4 years in the league, has flashes, but maybe hasn't put it all together yet. That's what I would expect to see, something like that. And particularly if they have that speed trait to them, because I could see them bringing somebody in specifically to be that Leo, literally the pass rush specialist. You're going to say Paye and Odangbo and Lewis are in there on most first and second downs, and on third down they've signed this guy just to come in and get the quarterback. I think you probably get that guy to do that. You look at how productive that position's been in Gus Bradley's defense on a short-term deal. Somebody's probably going to say, I'll come in there and I'll blow up and I'll get my long-term big money deal, next year or the year after.
And again, I think especially when you hit the top 3 of Kwity Paye, Dio Dengbo, then Tyquan Lewis. Lewis coming off of back-to-back seasons of season-ending knee injuries. It's like, again, okay, there's some, it's hope. Hopefully they can pan out, but it's almost like, to me, reminiscent of the offensive line from last year, where it's like, yeah, are they ready? We feel good, but are we absolutely sure? Absolutely not. Not a lot of veteran presence there. Some big time question marks where it's like, if you can at least shore that up. And again, outside of quarterback, you could argue the second most important position on the field. You really want to be able to get consistent pressure, especially now when you are in AFC with so many great quarterbacks, so many dynamic guys. The last thing you want them to do is be sitting back there, no problem, picking apart your defense. You got to be aggressive. You got to hit them, put pressure on them constantly. And that has to be an area the Colts and Chris Ballard have to look at, like you said, especially a little bit of veteran experience. Someone who's been around the block 3, 4, 5 years, where they're still, like I said, young enough to make an impact, not old as dirt, where they're just kind of there for experience and kind of mentorship. Kind of get the best of both worlds. That's definitely, I think, an area that the Colts defense could use a little bit more experience in. The last thing I want to throw by here, Georgia, is not one I've seen before. Like offensive line, corner, defensive end, receiver. That's all been talked about a lot by Colts fans. It's kind of obvious, right? I want to throw one by you here that I've not seen, but I am concerned about going to the year. I think needs more attention that's being given so far. Running back. Obviously, you have Jonathan Taylor. There's talks about giving Jonathan Taylor an extension. So you're going to put a good amount of money if he does get that extension into the running back position. But when you look at Shane Steichen and look how Philly ran their offense last year, Miles Sanders was back, running back one. But Kenny Gainwell, you had Boston Scott as well, really mix in. And it was kind of almost a three-headed running back situation in Philly where they ran the ball a ton. Obviously, Jalen Hurts was a running back himself, the way they ran the offense. But you look at the Colts running back situation. It's Jonathan Taylor. It is Zach Moss. It is Deion Jackson. And it is Funk. That's it. That's concerning. That is concerning, especially, again, when we talked about last year, or maybe in the preseason, Georgia should say in August, about trying to limit the amount of wear and tear on Jonathan Taylor's body. I think you need another viable option, a kind of running back too, especially when you trade away Nyheim Hines. I think you need a little bit more playmaking out of a backup running back than right now that you got. What do you think about that?
Yeah, they like Zach Moss a lot, and I was pleasantly surprised by him last year. When that trade was made, I thought he was just a throw in and wasn't going to give them much. He had some production in a tough spot. I mean, that offense wasn't doing a lot, so for him to get his first 100-yard game of his career, I thought it was a decent accomplishment given how hard it was to move the football for that football team. But you still don't. You can't look at that as a solid situation by any stretch of imagination. And I think even if you do look at Moss and say, okay, he's your, take the load off of Taylor back for a series here and there, you feel like he can be the power guy. What the Colts need, looking at that Eagles roster, is the back who can catch the ball in the backfield and be shifty in the open field afterwards. We've seen Jonathan Taylor, catch the ball and get some straight line speed and some big plays that way. But they don't necessarily have that guy who's going to catch the ball in the backfield, make somebody miss, turn, a small play into a big one. It's another reason to sign Paris Campbell, because you can use him in that regard. He was a running back, really until he got to Ohio State and did a little bit there. So you can use him similarly to the way you would a running back out of the backfield, but you need that guy. And so to me, that's more of a draft kind of a thing. You could probably go find him in free agency, but the money already is going to be spent on Taylor. I don't think you want to go, again and dip into that. But it's supposed to be a really big, really deep running back class. I mean, everybody knows about John Robinson, who's just a freak. He's Anthony Richardson of quarterbacks or of running backs, but with the tape to back it up. I saw him today. Like, he was the number 3 guy on the board for some people, which is incredible. But you're not getting him. But behind him, there's a lot of really good depth in this running back class. And I think that's when you're looking specifically, like you said, for that Nyheim Hines type, that's what they want. A shifty receiver type of running back. I think that's what you're missing in this group right now.
And you're 100% right. This is not a free agent pick. This is not something you say, okay, let's go shop the running back market in free agency. That's the last place I think you should go. But like you said, it's 100% a draftable position, 4th, 5th round, in part because, okay, Bijan Robinson will not be there for the Colts. That is just, he probably will go in the first round. Like, that's how, like, I feel like maybe I'm wrong with this, or maybe I'm missing someone. So if you can correct me, George, please do. But I think we have not seen a running back like this hyped it, and this consensually talked about, or consensusly talked about, I should say, running back going in the first round to Saquon Barkley. And Saquon Barkley ended up going number 2 to the Giants back in 2018. We've seen the devaluation of the running back position so much so that it's almost like unheard of at this point, for the most part, to take a running back in the first round. Few exceptions, but Bijan Robinson feels like he's going to crack that code and be maybe even a top half of the draft running back because of just how physically gifted he is. But outside of him, like I said, so many running backs get pushed down the board just because the position they play. You could still get, you talk about value. Maybe that's the best value spot or value position in the draft, just because so many teams say, screw it, we don't need a running back. We'll get someone in the 7th round. And that leaves a lot of really talented and productive running backs there on the board in rounds 3, 4, 5, and 6. You can actually go get them. But you're right. If you want to keep Zach Moss and have him be basically the Boston Scott bowling ball role that the Eagles had, okay. And you could kind of put Jonathan Taylor in the Miles Sanders mix where he can catch the ball in the backfield. He can run the ball strong, shifty, like I said, he can kind of do it all. And now you kind of that Kenny Gainwell, which is Nyheim Hines 2.0 role that is shifty, that is fast, is a change of pace. Because that's the only thing with Zach Moss and Jonathan Taylor. There are two powerful running backs, similar styles. Like I said, Taylor is shiftier, faster, makes you miss more, but Moss is that kind of bully, Derrick Henry, run downhill mode. There's not terribly that big of a difference in styles. So it's like if you could really get a change-up sort of back, someone that whatever quarterback the Colts draft could just dump it off in the backfield, like I said, just have him, make one man miss and turn a 5-yard completion into a 45-yard gain. That's what you got to be able to find. And that's something I said, I think you can really do a good job of finding that in the draft. And that's, I think, it's just a position where, again, you talk about Jonathan Taylor, we look at him, and that's not, I think, a position that's been talked about enough that I do think needs to be addressed again in the draft. So nothing crazy and later on in the draft, but I think has to be, or should be addressed just to kind of, like I said, get some balance, get some wear and tear off of Jonathan Taylor's legs or body, I should say. And also just, again, provide another home run element on an offense right now that does need help in terms of making explosive plays and making those splash plays that they've really struggled to do the last few years, especially as we know last year.
And it's something that the Ballard has a history of doing well. I mean, both Marlon Mack and Nyheim Hines were third-day draft picks. So you can see him being able to go out there 4th, 5th, 6th round and grab a guy like this who can make an impact right away. And I think it's an underrated need. The other one that I would throw in there is linebacker, just because it was one of the deepest positions on the team, but there's a good chance they're going to end up losing 3 guys from that spot in 2 years. They lost Matthew Adams last year, and now there's a good chance Bobby Okereke is as good as gone. I'll be shocked if he's back. You never say never in this business, but I will be stunned if he's back just because of the money that's already put into that position with Shaquille Leonard and what you're expecting him to get, on the open market. And then I don't think it's a big shock if EJ Speed is gone as well, given the fact that I think the biggest factor there to me is that Bubba Ventrone went to Cleveland. And you look at what EJ Speed did on special teams here. The Browns may want to bring him in as a guy who can help Bubba, get his system up and running there, and also be more of a factor on defense than he was here. If you lose both of those guys, then you need to replace them. But again, I think it's a draft need, not a free agent need. And you could argue that's the position that Chris Ballard has drafted the best. Zaire Franklin, Shaq Leonard, Okereke and Speed and Matt Adams. He's gotten them all over the draft board. And I think you just do that again, somewhere from the 3rd round on, you bring it, because it's not a huge need right away. Franklin and Leonard, if they're both healthy, are going to play the majority of the snaps. You don't have 3 linebackers on the field that often, but you've had a lot of depth there in the recent past. You're not going to have as much this year. I think it just makes a ton of sense to go and add at that spot as well.
Like I said, every defense now in the NFL with the passing just off their charts is just a 4-2-5. It's a glorified 4-2-5 where I said you're going to have mostly 2 linebackers on the field, 3 corners, 2 safeties, however you want to split it up, but 5 defensive backs. And like I said, that's kind of what we've seen. So you're right. Like you have 2 really good players if they're healthy, Zaire Franklin, Shaq Leonard. We know obviously Shaq's had a history where he missed the entire year, basically last year, where you do need some depth, but at least you feel good about your starters going into 2023, that there's some real talent there. And like I said, Chris Ballard's done an excellent job at drafting linebackers, having them be really, really productive pieces for the Colts. All right, let's talk about some few specific free agents here, George, that should be on the Colts radar, and should be some names for fans to be paying attention to once the legal tampering period starts here on Monday. So let me ask you this question. We kind of talked a little bit before, but the Colts have a ton of free agents. Of just free agents that are Colts specific free agents, if you were Chris Ballard and you said, okay, you can sign, money be damned, you could re-sign one guy this offseason, who's the guy you're resigning and absolutely not letting go no matter what?
I'm going to surprise some people. I'm going to say Chase McLaughlin. And the kicker spot has been such an issue for this team. Really since the year that Vinatieri started coming unraveled in 2019, it's been such a question mark, and it's something that can cost you a lot of games. When they saw it week 1 last year, McLaughlin went out there. It felt like he was kicking 50-yard field goals every week. He did everything you could ask of him. It's not going to be a big contract, but I just think just get that done. Why make another hole in an offseason that's already so busy? Why make another hole needlessly at a position that when you overlook it does tend to come back and bite you?
You are 100% right. I was not expecting that. And I think I think nailed it too. It's a position that's overlooked. I'll be honest, that was not even on my radar. I had like 3 or 4 players I'm kind of fighting through. No offense, Chase. You were not one of the 3 or 4 players I was thinking about, but you're all right. We saw Hot Rod lose the game week 1, or I should say tie the game week 1 with that missed field goal that kind of sent the season into a spiral in Houston. It's been an issue ever since Adam Vinatieri retired, like I said, or even really his last year. That was an issue where the kicking woes were kind of coming back to bite the Colts. McLaughlin was really solid. Like I said, I like that. I can't argue. It's not exactly the first thought I had. It's not one of those anytime we're talking about must sign, keep this guy, the kicker, unless your name is Justin Tucker. I like it, George. Outside of the box. I hope mine is outside of the box too. Here. Definitely not as big of a curveball. Yours was a 12-6 Madison Bumgarner or Clayton Kershaw one. This is going to be more of a fastball down the middle here. I'm going to go unique Ngakoue because of all the exact reasons we were talking about defensive end and what the Colts are looking for in kind of getting that third option with Dio and Kwity Paye is everything you just listed. What he checks. He's still young. He's productive consistently. He's been bouncing around teams, but it's always been one of those. Is he the flashiest player? No. But this guy is the model of consistency. I think if you're the Colts, I just don't think you can afford to let a guy who's been consistently productive, maybe not again, he's not breaking the numbers you want him to reach for sure, but he's good with the run, good with the pass. I think he's someone that is just one of those really solid players, good for the locker room, good for the position. I think he could give you consistency and stability, which especially at the defensive end position, when we're talking about the top 3 guys, assuming they do resign Taekwon Lewis, Dio Adangbo, and Kwity Paye, I think you need some consistency there, and that's what he brings. We'll see what Chris Ballard does. I just don't see why we're so quick to assume he's going to be gone, just because I think that's a position where I don't think the Colts can afford to lose. I think that he's truly the guy that when you talk about what you're looking for in that position, he epitomizes it.
Oh, there's no doubt. When they're going out in free agency and they're looking to fill that spot, a lot of those traits are going to be Ngakoue traits. I'm just not sure they can afford him on the way the cap situation is right now and some of the other things that are going to get done this year. That's why I've kind of written him off. But there's no doubt.
Do you think his market's going to be
world.
that crazy? Like, do you think it's going to be that where the Colts get priced out? Like, it's going to be that high?
I think it will where the Colts do. I don't think it's going to be a crazy number, but just from looking at the way they do business there, I think it's going to be higher than what they pay. You know, they tend to be a little cheap, you know, when it comes to free agency in general. And we really haven't seen them go out and spend huge money on a defensive end, even when they had a lot more cap space than they do. So I think it's one of those things you may well see him sign for $8 to $10 million a year. But I think right now that's something the Colts aren't going to be able to swing just because of all the other things that they need to take care of. Now, I could be pleasantly surprised here. He could come back and, you know, it could work. There's no doubt. If we're just talking about take all the financial and everything else off the table, he's right at the top of the list of guys. I would say he and Paris Campbell, from a simple scheme fit, are the 2 most important guys to bring back, because neither one of them is their replacement on the roster. You can immediately say, yeah, that guy does everything they do. Neither one of them has that guy. So I think they're both really important guys to bring back. They may find themselves in a position they can't afford either one of them, though.
I will say 2 quick reasons why I don't think it's wishful thinking. I think it will happen. Number 1, last year, Unique Ngakoue talked about trying to make Indy his home. He has been a guy who has bounced around to a lot of teams, and especially after the Jaguars, has been a lot of one and done in a lot of places. I think he's looking to kind of spread some roots and settle down a little bit. I think whether it's a hometown discount or just maybe if the prices are even, I think he would prefer to come back to the Colts and build some familiarity. And number 2, look, I know last year is not what he signed up for, right? Don't get me wrong. But I do think that now there's some hope. Now there's some belief that this is starting to head in the right direction. And also, too, kind of going back to what we said before to start the podcast, I do think Chris Ballard is going to operate a little bit differently than what we've seen. I think he's going to be a little bit more aggressive. I think willing to spend a little bit more money in free agency, just because, again, I think he's cognizant and realistic that they are probably going to lose draft picks in order to trade up to get their guy. And again, the second round pick that maybe you could have used out on the defensive end, maybe now he goes, you know what? Instead of, that pick is now going to be assuming gone to the Bears. Now I'm going to use that money or now I'm going to have to try to fill that void by going to free agency. So I do think we will see a different Chris Ballard this offseason when it comes to free agency, just because I do think he's going to be aware and cognizant of the fact that I'm going to have less draft picks than I'm used to dealing with. And I got to still build a roster in a different way. Okay. So You're saying Chase McLaughlin. I'm going Unique Ngakoue for the one Colts free agent we don't want to see go out the door and bring back and would re-sign in 2023. What about non-Colt free agent? There's a massive, massive pool of free agents here in the NFL. You could pick one. You're Chris Ballard. You get one non-Colts free agent to sign. Who are you taking?
I'm just going to do this for the fun factor because I think the media would love it, is Gardner Minshew. Bring him in as the quarterback to kind of hold the spot for the rookie. And just in case, you don't know what's going to happen with the rookie. Maybe they're a little bit further behind than you expect. Maybe maybe there's an injury. Maybe, any number of things can happen that's going to push a guy in there. But I just want to see Gardner Minshew's RV parked out there at Westfield at Grand Park for training camp. And the show would be worth it to me.
I think that would be honestly the biggest guest I think I would ever try to push to get on this podcast, to just get in the brain of Gardner Minshew. He truly would be, I think, the world's most interesting man, whether it's the outfits and the jorts, like I said, whether it's the RV that he travels in. I have so many questions that he would just be an absolutely fascinating guy to learn about and just hear talk and just be around for at least one season. That's for sure. I'm going to go sticking with the theme of Chris Ballard acting differently this offseason compared to past. Let's talk about this, George. I think the one Colts free agent they have to sign that's not currently or was on the team last year. I'm going to go Kansas City Chiefs left tackle Orlando Brown Jr. You talk about a splash move. The Colts never make it free agency. We talk about solidifying the offensive line. You look at a guy who just won a Super Bowl with the Chiefs, not franchise tag, is going to get a huge salary. He's going to get a big contract. But if you're Chris Ballard, why wouldn't you give him a big deal? We are talking about a guy at left tackle who, again, on offense, you could argue second most important position outside of quarterback. You're going to have a rookie quarterback under center this year. We're talking about a guy who's made now 4 straight Pro Bowls at left tackle. He has missed one game, George, in his career. One game. So he is right now so far the epitome of consistency. He is durable. He is dependable. And this guy by week 1, Orlando Brown Jr. is going to be 27 years old. It's not Trent Williams at 38 or whatever, how old he is. It's not, Anthony Costanzo later in his career. A 27-year-old left tackle on the open market, 4-time Pro Bowler who has missed one game in his career. That's, if you were Chris Ballard, you have to sign Orlando Brown Jr. That has to be the guy. We talked about before, they don't make a lot of splash moves. This is where the exception has to be made. You have to make exceptions sometimes for some great players that, in certain situations you wouldn't expect to be there. This is one where you rarely see a guy his talent on the open market. Take advantage, pounce, and we kind of talk about, if you sign Orlando Brown Jr., George, place her left tackle, you then could slide Bernard Wyman into right guard. And now we'll see what the future of Ryan Kelly is, whether Ryan Kelly is there or not, or whether it's Danny Pinner at center instead. You talk about an offensive line of, on the left side of Orlando Brown Jr., left tackle, Quentin Nelson at left guard. I feel pretty damn good about the Colts going forward here.
Yeah, and I think, Raymond would fit in well at right guard. I kind of had an inkling that's the way you were going. I wanted to leave that one for you. I just think Brown, he checks all the boxes, and he's the kind of guy that never hits free agency. You never see a left tackle at this age with that kind of production on the market. It's a very unique circumstance. I think Kansas City's probably feeling pretty good after letting Tyreek Hill go and still winning the Super Bowl. They're probably feeling like they can do whatever they want. And they've got to be thrifty in some ways. I mean, you are paying Patrick Mahomes, and of course you are. Why would you not pay Patrick Mahomes? But they may not be able to afford a luxury at this point that is Orlando Brown. I think the Colts are going to have a quarterback on a rookie deal. I think it would be a terrific move for him. Bring in this left tackle and just tell him, hey, that the left side of line's locked up. You don't have to worry about it. You can pay attention to the right side, the side you can actually see, and don't worry about your blind side at all. You're covered. And you could arguably improve at least 2, if not 3 positions on the field with just that one move, because by moving Raymond to right guard, you may shore things up there. And at worst case, Raymond becomes your swing tackle, which is an incredibly important position on the offensive line as well. So I would do it. I think it's definitely one of the things that, as you're going to step outside, whatever you want to call it, your comfort level, however you want to term that, this is the kind of move that you do that for. This is exactly the kind of move that you do that for. Again, I just don't think players like Orlando Brown hit free agency. not even often, ever. You just don't. If there's a tackle like this of his caliber, he's either old or he's injured. Uh, just find a kid who's basically in his prime, who's a 4-time Pro Bowler the whole league should be knocking down his door.
And if you're the Colts, I don't think, again, you can get out better or you can have them say no, in part because, look, Matt Ryan's going to get cut at some point next week. He right now has the biggest salary, the biggest cap hit on the team. When he is gone, it's going to be Shaq Leonard. I believe it's like 19 and change is his cap hit for 2023. So you're talking about a team right now that's going to have a quarterback on a rookie deal, and the biggest cap hit on the roster is going to be their linebacker and Shaq Leonard. Like, financially, go for it. Like, go and get it. Go, like, that is one of the benefits of having a rookie quarterback. And one of the benefits, again, of trying to build through the draft is you get guys on cheaper contracts, which allows you to splurge at other positions. The Colts right now have a luxury that the Chiefs do not. Like I said, the Chiefs are paying Patrick Mahomes. The Chiefs are paying Travis Kelce some big time money. The Chiefs have spent high and it's worked out, and they're not complaining. They just won a Super Bowl. But that also means you can't keep everyone. We saw Tyreek Hill last year go. We're going to probably see Orlando Brown Jr. go as well. Take advantage. Get the guys that they can't afford. And again, solidify your line, especially if you are leaning Bryce Young. And Chris Ballard is maybe a little bit skeptical of his size, but the 204 is not enough for him to say no. Well, again, one of the ways you keep your quarterback upright is by having a very solid left side of the line that will not allow him to get hit that often. Quentin Nelson, Orlando Brown Jr., like I said, Orlando Brown Jr.'s presence alone will make Quentin Nelson better, because at times, George, we talked this on the podcast, it felt like Quentin Nelson was almost playing two positions at once last year, whether it was Matt Pryor when he started or whether it was Bernard Ryan when he's cutting his teeth later in the season. There was so much inexperience at left tackle, or just not a lot of talent, frankly, that it almost felt like Quentin Nelson was trying to do two things at once, and you had Ryan Kelly's play slipping as well. It almost felt like at times Quentin Nelson trying to block three guys at one time. He's worried about the left tackle. He's worried about the center. Obviously has to be worried about the guy in front of him too. And now you just make your best offensive lineman's job easier by having him basically not worry about the left side and the guy next to him at all. And whether it's Ryan Kelly, whether it's you slide in Danny Pinter as well at center, and either way, okay, now you can just, help them out a little bit as well with Quentin Nelson kind of be, being better with Orlando Brown Jr.'s presence. It just, to me, it makes all the sense in the world. Like, if you're going to splurge on one guy, take a big swing in free agency, that has to be the guy, because not only is he the best left tackle the Colts will have since Anthony Costanzo, and put a Band-Aid on that position as you're trying to put a Band-Aid on the quarterback, or stop putting a Band-Aid on the quarterback position, I should say, and stop putting a Band-Aid in the left tackle position. It also, like I said, helps other areas of the line as well, where if Bernard Ryman's truly your best right guard and that's where he slots in, okay, that's an improvement. If Ryan, now that maybe gives you or makes it easier for the Colts to move off of Ryan Kelly, trade him for, whatever, just a straight up trade, maybe include him in the Bears trade in order to get up to number one and make it easier to move off of Ryan Kelly, because then you feel better about putting Danny Pinter there at center. And so it just works out where your depth is better. The line is better without getting that much more expensive. Georgia makes too much sense in the world for it to happen, where you really cannot allow another team to outbid you. You got to make it happen. We know teams now are adept at moving money around and getting under the cap and being cap compliant. If you move off of Kelly, if you move, when you cut Matt Ryan, maybe, you include a Kenny Moore to force Buckner in a trade. That opens up some more cap room as well later down the road. Like, there are ways to make it work. You got to make it work. That has to be the guy they got to sign.
I think the team that scares me the most there, though, is Chicago. They've got by far the most money in this draft.
Yeah, that's true.
In this free agency class, and they can throw it at him, and they should too. I mean, everything we just said, every reason the Colts should bring him in, the Bears have every single one of those reasons as well. So you want to help out Justin Fields, go get him Orlando Brown. It'll be interesting to see. And I'm sure, like I said before, every general manager who's not in Kansas City is probably thinking about this move. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. I mean, you do not have left tackles like this hit the open market, and anybody who's got a question at left tackle, which is probably most of the league, has got to be considering this. It really, if I'm Orlando Brown, I'm taking my time. I'm taking all my visits. I'm probably going to get similar money from just about anywhere. So I'm going to go find the best fit for me. And if I'm the Colts, I'm going to put the Hoosier hospitality on to the absolute, hilt. I'm going to make sure he's got the shrimp cocktail down there at St. Elmo. I'm going to bring in every big gun I can, because I think that's, if I'm Orlando Brown at the end of the day, I want to win. So I'm going to want to know who that quarterback is that I'm going to be blocking for. And then I want the best fit for me. I want to go somewhere where I can settle in for at least the next 4 to 6 years, and feel like it's a good place for me and my family. And the Colts have to do everything in their power to convince them it's here.
Hard to find another team right now that is going to have a better left guard situation than Quentin Nelson. So again, you talk about Orlando Brown Jr. and the fit. You can go to the Bears in the most money. Also, you're kind of on an island how bad their offensive line is, where you're going to have to be, doing everyone's job there and leading the way, where you could still be the anchor for the Colts, still be that solid left tackle cornerstone. But the guy next to you is also pretty damn good too, and is going to make your job easier and make you shine even more, and maybe help you get another contract down the road too. I wish I'd mentioned this before, but I just want to mention again as another reason for the Colts to go after Orlando Brown Jr. The guy just won a Super Bowl, right? I do think championship experience matters. Like, I do think you have to have guys on your roster that know how to win, that knows what it takes to get to the ultimate pinnacle in the NFL and winning a Super Bowl. The Colts, you look around the roster, they don't have a lot of that, right? We expect Nick Foles to get cut. So that's a guy who won a Super Bowl, out the door. Rodney McLeod, if he's not re-signed, out the door. Other than that, you have DeForest Buckner, who's been in a Super Bowl. I may be blanking on another guy or two, but otherwise, George, there's not a lot of experience on this roster, Stephon Gilmore too, of guys that have won rings that kind of know what it is outside of Shane Steichen. I do think it really is beneficial to have guys with championship pedigrees on your roster to kind of infuse that winning attitude, that winning culture throughout the rest of the locker room.
Yeah, and if they happen to play a premium position and
Doesn't
be in
hurt.
their prime, hey, all the more. There's really no reason not to go after Brown. I just think he's gonna be the guy. And I think what makes it harder too is that in general, it's considered to be a weak free agent class. There's not a lot of big contracts probably going to be given out. So I think that just makes it even more likely that Brown gets the biggest deal of anybody in this offseason. And that would really be stepping outside the box for Chris Ballard. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I don't anticipate it happening, but it is absolutely the move I would make. As we're talking now, like, what move would you make? That is 100% the one that I would make.
And if it's the move that is made, I don't think it's premature to start thinking about, okay, the Colts are going for it. And I think if you see Chris Ballard again act out of character, I think to me that would signal to the rest of Colts fans, Chris Ballard's going to be aggressive, and I think they're going to move up to the number 1 overall pick. I think that, again, I think you can put the correlation there, and I would start a mini celebration of, okay, you got a great left tackle. Also, this probably means the Colts are going to be ultra aggressive, go up to number 1 and get their guy. Fingers crossed they pay the price to get Bryce. Let me throw 2 quick names out there for you, George. Just really, rapid thoughts here. If you have any other names, let's hear. But like I said, it's not really a big free agent class. Not a lot of headliner names to talk about. But 2 former Eagles are out there that I'm curious your thoughts on. Number 1 is Fletcher Cox. Older, a defensive tackle on the older side. But I wonder, if you're Chris Ballard and you anticipate trading on up, and maybe that includes a guy like DeForest Buckner, if that's what it's going to take, and that's what the Bears want. Again, Matty Eberflus, and we know his connection to the Colts defense, and we know they need help on defense desperately. So maybe instead of a first-round pick, or maybe instead of a second-round pick, they say, give us DeForest Buckner instead. If you're Chris Ballard and you kind of have to think to yourself, we're probably going to part with 1 or 2 really high-level players in order to move up to number 1, would it be could you see Fletcher Cox as a realistic option, or would that be, if you're going to, trade up and think kind of replacing guys ahead, it's going to be later, closer to the draft when that move is actually made? Can you see Fletcher Cox on the radar at all?
Only if the trade is made ahead of time. If Buckner's gone, then I see the logic there, because he's the kind of guy who could give you that 2 to 3 years in that spot that maybe give you the chance to go and draft Buckner's eventual replacement. Because you're not going to be able to do that right away. As we talked about, in this scenario, they've traded up, and so you don't have those draft picks that you would normally have. I think Fletcher Cox is exactly the kind of guy you want to bring in, replace some of that leadership, replace some of the on-field production. Obviously, Steichen is familiar with him, so I think that would help a lot, in terms of having that comfort level, bringing him in. And I don't think he'll be a hugely expensive guy. He's going to be more expensive than the Colts usually like to go. but he's on the downside of his career. So, he's not going to be, I don't think he's going to get the deal Orlando Brown's going to get, for
Right.
instance. And I think that's, to me, somebody like that is exactly where you would need to go if you end up trading DeForest Buckner. Not saying that's going to happen, but if in fact he is involved in a massive deal to go up to number one, that's the scenario where I would believe that Fletcher Cox becomes a realistic option here.
And that's what kind of makes this free agency period for the Colts a little muddied and a little tough to read, just because, like I said, if you anticipate, if you're Chris Ballard thinking ahead, we're going to trade up, or we're going to try our best to trade up, and you have to think that's going to include at least a player or two. Then at the same time, you want to, like I said, still try to be able to replace that player. If it is a guy like DeForest Buckner, or even a guy like Ryan Kelly, let's say, if the Bears want him with their offensive line needs, like it's just like, it's one of those where you also kind of want to think ahead of, okay, if we're going to, trade them eventually, kind of getting their replacement or getting someone that could kind of fit right in and not be a project would be obviously super beneficial. I think you're right that they probably would not sign Fletcher Cox until the move is officially made, which I wonder if that would put a little bit of pressure on the Colts to get a deal done sooner rather than later. I still think it's going to take a while, and we won't see a deal, let's say, next week for the first overall pick. But that was just one I want to get your thoughts on. Another one.
And Ryan Poles did mention that if there were players involved in the deal, he'd want to get it done earlier. Because on the Bears side, it's the same way. If they're going to get players back, they want to know going into free agency, one, how much money they've given up already to bring these guys on, and two, you would pivot, what you need. Maybe they're a team that's looking at Fletcher Cox, for instance, but they're not if they made a trade for DeForest Buckner, and the Colts or any other team that they would deal with would be in the same boat. You want to have that done going in for ages. That's the one reason to do the trade, sooner rather than later.
And the other name I want to throw by you here would be a reunion. Now, we talked about Paris Campbell before, but as a guy like Zach Pascal, who done a really solid job for the Colts here in his time in Indy, goes to Philly, helps them obviously get to the Super Bowl. Shane Steichen knows him well. He really provides that he does a lot of the dirty work that the Colts, I think, really missed last year. Mm-hmm. Look at their connection. That's, I think, a guy to keep an eye on.
They missed him a lot in the running game. They missed him a lot. His ability to block out there on the perimeter. I think, if he was amenable to a return, obviously Shane Steichen knows exactly what he brings. A lot of people in that building know exactly what he brings. I think I'd do that one pretty quickly.
Me too. I think that'd be a perfect fit. And like you said, Steichen knows him well. The Colts know him well. He was a great fit here. And like I said, he really does help this offense, not only just catching the ball and being a reliable receiver, but more importantly, like I said, kind of doing the dirty work, getting down there, moving corners out of the way, getting safeties blocked, and also, like I said, just kind of doing the small things that kind of helped spring big plays. Last play I want to throw out there. This is interesting to me. CBS Sports had basically, the free agent tracker, talking about some of the biggest free agent names, and some destinations that they're most likely to go to. They had one big time free agent most likely to go to the Colts. It was a position I was not on the radar for, and it's interesting. Jesse Bates, safety from the Bengals. He's going to command a big deal, but CBS Sports at least was projecting that one of the best fits for him would be the Colts. Really good safety. Obviously on the Bengals, they've had a lot of success recently. Is safety a position, and we talked about it before when it comes to secondary overall, not a lot of experience, and they're going to need a lot of talent because a lot of guys are, it's a shifting position. You want to spend that much money in safety?
I don't. I mean, and
Same.
That's nothing against Jesse Bates. I think he's a really good player, and he's probably going to go help somebody win games next year, wherever he lands, just as he's helped Cincinnati win a ton of games the last couple of years. I just can't. The money that you'd have to spend at that position right now, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. They'll probably bring in a veteran safety, but it'll probably be something closer to the Rodney McLeod situation last year, where it's a guy, older on in his career, who's going to be in there to do some very specific things for them on a shorter deal. I just don't think again, you mentioned it, when we were going through the position needs, it's not a solidified spot, especially if McLeod's not back. You've got the injury history with Blackman that is concerning. Rodney Thomas had a great year, but he's a rookie. And you don't know, how that's going to go in year two. And Nick Cross, things didn't work out for him in year one. So, obviously you're not going to cut ties with him already, but you're also not going to I wouldn't think you're going to pencil him in for a
Right.
major role. So you're going to make him earn that role. But Jesse Bates, to me, with all the other needs, I mean, we were talking about, left tackle and quarterback and all the other things, find a slot receiver, spending that kind of money at safety would seem to be a luxury the Colts don't have, in my mind.
It'd be a waste. He's a great player. He's a team captain, so the leadership, I'm sure, would check out with what Chris Ballard's looking for. But like I said, the money you're going to have to spend to get Jesse Bates to town, I'd rather spend at left tackle. I'd rather spend it at wide receiver. I'd rather spend it on defensive end, like more premier positions that the Colts are in need of and could use, a boost in free agency compared to paying big time money for a safety. Like you said, it's a position of need. Colts need more experience and more productivity from the secondary overall. But that's just not one where I think right now it's feasible for the Colts, especially where they are. If they were a team that had a quarterback, if they were a team that had a Trevor Lawrence, let's say, if they were in the Jaguar situation where, okay, there's some promise there, Trevor Lawrence is not going to get an extension this offseason, so you still have some money freed up. That's where I'd say, you know what, pay the big time money, get a guy with some, leadership and a guy who's been in some big games and won some big games, get him on in here. The Colts are not ready. We've talked this a ton. The Colts are not ready to win next year. They're a team that's hopefully on the ascent, but not anywhere near kind of like, okay, it's takeoff. Let's get those finishing one or two pieces. Jesse Bates feels like a finishing piece for a championship team or a contending team that's trying to take the jump from contender to championship contender. Colts right now is trying to get off the mat. They're just trying to get off the mat and get back on the road and know where the hell they're driving and stop, veering off, taking U-turns, wrong direction, flat tire. Let's just get back on the road, George. Let's get the car working here and let's start heading towards the right destination. But they are far away from that destination.
Yeah, you don't make that move now. I'm sure CBS is thinking more from the Gus Bradley standpoint. You see what safeties have done in that system, and I'm sure Jesse Bates would play remarkably well here and would fit remarkably well here. But it doesn't make sense from a dollars and cents standpoint, and it doesn't make sense from this offseason. Like you're talking about what this offseason's about. What you're trying to do is getting off the mat, and that means upgrading at some really premier positions and getting down the road where you can sign a Jesse Bates 2 or 3 years from now.
Absolutely. Right. Like that. Right. We're sitting here 3 years when everything goes well. Then that's a move that let's go for it. And let's make a real run at the Chiefs, at the Bengals. Not right now. Not right now. That's for sure. Because ideally when the Colts are ready to contend and go for it, Jesse Bates is going to be on the tail end of his career, tail end of the contract. And yeah, it's not going to really work out the way you want. It's not the greatest allocation of resources. That is for sure. Okay. So that is our free agency preview show right here on the Blue Horseshoe Pod. We appreciate you listening. Make sure you do check us out on YouTube, Blue Horseshoe Pod, wherever you do get your podcast, same name, Blue Horseshoe Pod, but we are the blue logo. There's 2 Blue Horseshoe podcasts, our old feed, which unfortunately is not updated anymore, and our new feed, which obviously does, which has a nice bright blue logo. The Blue Horseshoe Pod, that's the one subscribe to. That's the one where every single episode will be uploaded to that feed. So make sure you check us out there. We will be back next week, as I almost spill my water here in excitement. We will be back next week, kind of already start to decide for the legal tampering period underway. Who are other Colts talking to? Are they in the mix for a guy like Orlando Brown Jr.? Are they talking to Paris Campbell's reps? It's going to be a very interesting time to see Chris Ballard. Now, we've talked about it. He needs to change his actions this offseason compared to previous years when it comes to free agency, George. By the time we record on Tuesday, we should at least start to get the sense of if the Colts will be business as usual or if there could be a little heightened sense of urgency or a little different tune they're singing this year compared to previous years. So that will do it for this edition of the podcast. We appreciate listening. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday right here on the Blue Horseshoe Pod.